I still remember the way everyone looked at him when he stepped into that boardroom. Eyes widened, whispers exchanged, confusion written all over their faces. A janitor? Sitting among executives, dressed in his simple uniform while they wore their expensive suits? No one could understand why he was there. But I did. It all began on a cold Monday morning. The city was still waking up, the streets wet from last night's rain, and the towering offices of Henderson & Co. were already alive with movement. Employees rushed in, coffee cups in hand, dressed in sharp business attire. Phones rang, emails buzzed, and meetings were scheduled before the sun had fully risen. At the top of the building, in the largest office with floor-to-ceiling windows, sat Margaret Henderson. She was the kind of woman people admired and feared in equal measure. Strong, independent, a force of nature. But beneath all that success, there was loneliness. Since her husband's passing years ago, she had built an empire, but lost herself in the process. She was respected, but not loved. Feared, but not understood. People around her spoke with careful words, afraid of saying the wrong thing. They admired her power, but never truly saw her. Except for one person. Robert, the janitor. For nearly a decade, Robert had worked in the building, unnoticed by most. He was in his late 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes, always seen with a mop over his shoulder or a bucket in his hands. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, his words had a way of sticking with you. Unlike everyone else, he never treated Margaret like she was untouchable. Every morning, without fail, he greeted her with a kind smile. "Good morning, ma'am. Hope today's a good one." At first, she barely responded. Just a nod, maybe a polite smile if she was in the mood. But over time, she found herself looking forward to those words. In a world where people only spoke to her when they needed something, Robert was different. Then, one evening, everything changed. Margaret had stayed late, buried in work as usual. The office was empty, except for the distant sound of a mop gliding across the marble floor. She stood by the window, looking down at the city below, lost in thought. "Long night, ma'am?" She turned. There he was. Robert? Pushing his mop across the hallway outside her office. She sighed. "Seems like every night is." Robert chuckled. "Ain't that the truth?" For some reason, in that moment, Margaret did something she had never done before. She asked him a question. "Robert, have you ever been inside a boardroom?" He paused, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Can't say I have, ma'am. Not really a place for folks like me." Margaret studied him for a moment. Then, without thinking, she said, "Come to the meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m., don't be late." He blinked. "Me? In a board meeting?" She nodded. "Yes." He hesitated. "I don't know the first thing about business, ma'am." Margaret smiled, really smiled, for the first time in a while. "That's exactly why I want you there." The meeting that shocked everyone. The next morning, the tension in the boardroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. The executives sat in their usual spots, men in expensive suits, women in tailored dresses, each one prepared to discuss profit margins and market shares. Then, the door opened, and in walked Robert. Silence. Every head turned. Eyes darted between each other, searching for an explanation. Margaret, sitting at the head of the table, simply gestured to an empty seat beside her. "Robert, please have a seat." Hesitant but steady, Robert walked across the room and sat down. The room was still frozen, everyone unsure of what to say. Finally, one of the executives cleared his throat. "Mrs. Henderson, what's going on?" Margaret leaned forward, resting her hands on the polished wood. "I invited Robert here today because I believe he sees something that the rest of us don't." She turned to him. "Robert, tell me, what do you see in this company?" A long pause. Then Robert took a deep breath and spoke. "Well, ma'am," he started, "I see a lot of busy people. I see folks working past midnight, missing their families, drinking too much coffee and forgetting to eat lunch. I see employees who don't smile much, who walk past each other without saying hello. And I see you, Mrs. Margaret Henderson, every night, sitting in that big office all alone." Silence. The room that was once filled with high-powered executives suddenly felt small. Margaret's throat tightened. "And what would you do if you were in my position?" Robert thought for a moment before answering. "I'd remind people that they're more than just their jobs. I'd make sure the folks at the bottom feel just as important as the folks at the top. I'd show them that success ain't just about numbers, it's about people." The room stayed quiet, the weight of his words settling in. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the executives, the same one who had questioned Robert's presence, nodded. "He's right." Another voice, then another. People started murmuring in agreement, shifting uncomfortably as they realized how much they had overlooked. Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. That day she made a decision that would change the company forever. She announced a new initiative, one that prioritized employee well-being, encouraged open communication, and ensured that every single person in the company felt seen and valued. And at the heart of it all was Robert. A friendship no one expected. Over the next few months, things changed. Employees worked hard, but they also took breaks. Meetings started with quick check-ins about how people were actually doing. And for the first time in years, Margaret didn't feel like she was running a company alone. One evening, as she was leaving the office earlier than usual, she saw Robert mopping the same hallway. She smiled. "Good night, Robert." He grinned back. "Good night, ma'am. Hope today treated you well." And for the first time in a long, long time, Margaret could honestly say, it did. Hey everyone, if this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you why we need to keep having these conversations, please take a moment to like this video. It really helps spread awareness. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this? Let's talk about it. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're here to share real, powerful stories that need to be heard. Lastly, share this with your friends and family. The more people who see this, the more we can bring awareness and change. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey. Let's keep pushing forward, together.